It seems like every year about this time, so many of us begin to analyze the last year. We start thinking about the impact that we could have made. And for most of us, the things that we did was only a ripple compared to what we thought that we might be able to pull off. And some of us have already settled our differences with the things that we weren't able to do last year. We're already looking forward to 2019 and what we can accomplish this year. And we can begin to look at the things we've been facing. And some people will say, if only my health was better. If only my finances were better. I could have made an eternal impact. I could have maybe given more money to the church. I could have. If only. And the problem is, though, is that if only never comes, right? If only I could have. It just never seems to happen. And I don't know what you're up against. Now I don't know what you're facing. And I'm sure you don't know what I've been through or what I've been facing. But I'm guessing it's a good bet that each one of us has been facing something. Some of us more than others. And in fact, what some of us are facing today is probably so large, so big, that it would seem like the odds are stacked against us. So what I want to do is I want to take you into a story in the Old Testament, and I want to show you a man who had the odds against him. The odds were so stacked against him that it looked like it would be an impossibility for him to be able to get through it. So what I want you to do is turn with me in your Bibles. Let me hear those pages turning if I could. Judges chapter 3, and I'm going to start reading at verse 31. An amazing story, as a matter of fact, that I'm going to read to you right here. I dare say you've never heard of this man as you're turning there. Judges chapter 3, verse 31. And we're going to hear about a guy by the name of Shamgar. Judges chapter 3, verse 31. After Ehud came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he too saved Israel. Wow, that's a good verse, isn't it? Let me read that again. After Ehud came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad, and he too saved Israel. Well, that's one of the places where we hear his name. If you look over across the page, chapter 5, verse 6, it says this: in the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the roads were abandoned, and travelers took to winding paths. Or roundabout ways. Anyway, in other words, they were trying to get away from those roads where all the crime was happening. Now, as you read the book of Judges, one of the things that you find out is that this book is a book about chaos. In fact, there's always chaotic things happening, and there's one chaotic story after another. One year it's good, one year it's bad. One day it's good, one day it's bad. And we see the phrase used over and over again in this particular book that in that day there were no kings. Did you get that? There were no kings. There's another phrase that you hear over and over again, and that's this: that people did whatever they thought was right in their own eyes. Now, there was chaos, there was no standard, and everyone made up the rules as they went along, so you have this going on, and everybody did what they thought was right in their own eye. If it felt good, don't worry about the results, right? Remind you of a day we live in? Does it remind you of anybody that you know? But in fact, it really didn't matter what was right for everybody else as long as I do what's right for me. And there was no king to establish the law. There was nobody that would come along and that could set the standard that people could follow. And so everybody did what became their own standard. And in fact, everybody became, in fact, their own God. Because isn't that the way that we express God? God is the one who would give us a standard by which we would live by. So in that sense, everybody became their own God. And when you read this book, it just reminds you over and over again of cyclical events. And probably out of this comes a man. And it's probably a man you've never heard of. And in fact, when we find the lessons about Shamgar, this is going to be able to help us build the realm of possibility, or build the prospects of possibility for 2019 for your life. And first of all, in 2019, we most likely are going to face down the odds that are against us. When I say most likely, you have a choice, I have a choice, and you can do that. But follow the example of this man. But if you do, you won't be alone, because there's another man who lived in the realm of impossibility. And he measured himself up against it and said, with my God, I can get myself through. And you're going to find out here that because he faced 600 Philistines, it doesn't mean that it was an impossibility. What it meant, that God was a God that could get him through. Now let's look at how this works out. Because this is 600 to 1 odds against him. And I don't know what your odds are. I don't know what's happened to you as you leave 2018 and we roll into 2019. But probably nobody here has ever faced 600 to 1 odds. But whatever those odds were, you can beat them. And he beat them. And it's what put his name in the book. So let's take a look at this, because we're given a hint about the circumstances surrounding Shamgar in verse 1. In fact, chapter 5, verse 6, the other verse that we read, it says, because people would not travel the normal routes, they had deserted the highways, and they traversed on the roundabout ways. They took any direction they could to stay away from the criminal activity that was on the roads. And they lived in a day that you might say Israel lives in today. Not too much different, because as you're going around, you're facing Philistines in a different name, because they call them now Palestines, or the Palestinian territory. And so it wasn't safe to be able to travel in that day. And you certainly couldn't go out at night. That wouldn't have been a good idea. And folks had deserted the main thoroughfares. And it was just a dangerous day to live in. And so they'd go through the back ways. They would avoid the highways. And you never knew when a marauding band of Philistines would come and try to attack you. And they were raiding Israel day and night and wreaking havoc in the land. And so it wasn't a good time, and it was a time of terror, and people were living in fear. But what are you going to do? See, the security that they wanted, it wasn't there. The security that they'd formerly known, it wasn't there. You see, what I wonder as we go into 2019, as we roll into this new year, is there anybody here that feels like the enemy's been calling the shots? Anybody here, and you think that the enemies are the ones that have been calling the shots for you, and you can't go to the left, you can't go to the right. It seems like any road you take, the enemy is there, and they're ready to take advantage of you, and you can't go down a straight road anymore, because even when it looks like you go down the straight road, it looks like the enemy still wants to pick you off. Now, there's a principle, in fact, there's 3 principles in Shamgar's life that I want to be able to share with you today. And as we share these things, it's going to allow you, if you apply these things, to build your life up in the realm of possibility that will, even if you live in a world that is dangerously against you, it'll put you in a place where you can live the impossibility. And after I share with these, what these 3 impossible things are, what these 3 principles are, there's a key point here that I want to close with that lets you know why those 3 points work. Let me tell you what this is. Because the first thing that I want you to see about Shamgar is that he started where he was at. He started where he was at. And let me say that again, because you need to understand that no matter where you've been born, no matter what you have in front of you, no matter what your circumstances are today, you have to start where you're at. And there's a few things that we know about Shamgar as we get started. We know this: Shamgar's a farmer. And the reason that we know that Shamgar is a farmer is because Shamgar has an ox goad. If you don't know what an ox goad is, an ox goad is something that a farmer would have. And I know this about Shamgar, that he uses, because of his occupation, he uses what he simply had. Now, just like a carpenter would have a tool belt, he'd have a hammer, he'd have a tape, he might have a square, he might have these things inside of his tool belt. A farmer wants to use the tools that he has. And Shamgar had one particular tool, the one tool that we know that he had, and that's called an ox guard. Now let me tell you what an ox guard is. An ox guard is something that you would prod oxen with on one side. On the other side, you would dig potatoes with. And see, you can look at any particular person in any particular field and know what they are based on the tools that they have. You see somebody walking in a white frock and he's got a stethoscope around his neck, you can pretty much assume he's a doctor. If you see a man in blue and he's got a badge on and he's got a gun at his side, I think it's safe to assume he's a policeman. In other words, the tools declare the occupation. It was no different with Shamgar. And so what do you do when you have an ox goad? Well, it's sharp on one end, it's blunt on the other, and so on one end it's kind of rounded, and you can dig up things out of the ground like potatoes. On the other end, it's sharp, so you can, as you're hoeing the land, you can goad that ox, and so he's pulling and hoeing the land for you so that you can get through it. So it's a very useful tool for a man in that particular day. So Shamgar is a farmer, but why is it so important that we know this about him? Well, look back again at chapter 3, verse 31, and this is what it says. After Ehud came Shamgar, the son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with a farmer's tool, with a carpenter's square, with a tape, with a policeman's badge, with a stethoscope. Do you see where I'm going? He used what he had to be able to do what God called him to do. Now, later on, what we're going to find out about him is that Shamgar becomes a judge. In fact, he's in this book because he is a judge. And it says, after him. Did you see that? After him. Now, the writer is listing the judges, the leaders of Israel, the ones that would come after him, that we could look at, that we could see that God used to become a leader of Israel. So this is what we know about Shamgar. Shamgar became a leader of Israel. But what you need to know is he didn't start there. That's not where he started. And so the writer's listing the judges of Israel. But what you see about Shamgar is Shamgar started on a farm. That's where he started at. And so he becomes a leader, but he didn't wait till things got better. He didn't wait till the big dream came. He didn't wait till he said, after I retire, I can do this, I can do that for God. He didn't discriminate the day that he lived in, and he didn't procrastinate and wait for things to get better before he got going with what God told him to do. He did it right there. And so what we see about this man is that he got going in the day that he lived in. He got going with what he had, and he started where he was at. He was simply just a farmer, but Shamgar started right where he was at. And he didn't do what most of us would do. I think a lot of us might say, well, next week when things get better. Or he didn't say, I'm not a military man, and clearly this is a military problem. He didn't say that I'm just not fit for this. What he realized is, I am a farmer, and I'm going to do my part. I'm going to do the part somebody else won't do, but I've got to do something. And so he steps into that, but he starts right where he's at. You see, it's not what some of us would do if we had $1 million. It's what you would do if you had $5. You see, that's what God looks at. And it's not what some of us would do if we had a bigger house. It's what you do with where you live right now. It's not what you would do if you had a greater car, a better car, a faster car. It's what are you going to do with what God has allowed you to have right now. See, the past is important and we learn from it, but the past gives us great lessons if we learn from them. The future is important because that's where our dreams are, but our desires, what we plan for, what we look forward to, that happens in the now, right? I'm looking forward to what God will do, but I start right where I'm at. So don't think that I'm dismissing the importance of the past, or I'm not looking at the importance of the future. That's all you have sometime. But you need to know that you're missing, if that's all you look at is the past and the future, you're missing what's right in front of you. And you can't afford to do that. So you have what you have right now. You have what God has placed right in front of you. And I love what Shamgar does. He starts right where he's at. He starts with what he has right in front of him. See, if you look to yesterday to get your groove on, something's wrong. If you're looking at yesterday to get excited, something's wrong. If you're looking at yesterday to be able to feel like you're somebody, then you're missing what God has given you today. Oh, saints, don't do that. And let me tell you something about this man, something about this guy that we call Shamgar. He's a farmer. He's a farmer, that's all he is. You say, what do you mean that's all he is? They feed all of us. That's true. But I don't want you to diminish what he was in his own eyes. Let me tell you something about Shamgar as a farmer. He decided, I'm going to start where I'm at. And if I start where I'm at, I start right today. I don't start tomorrow. I don't start next year. I start where I'm at. And I'm not in yesterday. And yesterday's over. And I'm not yet in tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to come soon enough. But I'm where I am right now. And so that was what Shamgar did. But then you say, well, Shamgar's only one man. What can one man do? I mean, didn't you say that he already had 600 to 1 odds? So if you're only one man, then what can one man do? Well, let me explain something to you. I was looking this up a little bit earlier today, and I found out that one kernel of wheat produces one stalk. And in one stalk, you can get 3 heads of wheat. All right? Now listen to me now, because each head has 35 kernels, which all together will produce over 100 kernels of wheat. Now, if you plant those 100 kernels of wheat, you're going to get 10,000. And when those 10,000 are replanted, you'll get 1,000,000. See, it's amazing what one kernel of wheat can do. See, it's amazing what one man will do if he starts where he's at. See, what I want you to see is Shamgar is a farmer. Shamgar, he's not a military man, but that's not what he was. He was not about to let 600 fools decide his future. Shamgar was not about to let 600 nobodies come in and tell him what God was going to do or what God wasn't going to do. See, what he did is he faced them down. And I think that a lot of times the reason that you're failing, I'm failing, somebody else is failing is we've been letting 600 fools of the Philistine army tell us what we're going to do or what we're not going to do. We've been letting 600 Philistines call the shots. You have 600 fools from nowhere keeping us from getting anywhere. Oh, saints, that can't happen to us. And so we will often, in fact, let me tell you what a fool looks like. A fool will often say it this way: when I get older, when I get a little richer, when I get a better job, when I get a better partner, when I get a better house, when I. Some people will spend 80 years talking about when I, or if I, or because I, and they blame it on somebody else, but not Shamgar, because he didn't think that things needed to stay the way that they were. In fact, he knew that things needed to change, and he said, we can't go down these highways. The people out there on those highways are acting like crazy, and it doesn't have to be like this. The man dreamt of a better future. Saints, are you dreaming today? Are you dreaming about what God could do if he used you? And so here we are in 2019, and I've got to ask you, what is your dream? What has God been speaking in your heart? What do you see out there? What do you see out there that says, that's me, that's me, that's what I'm talking about, that's what God has called me to? What is it? All right. The second thing that I see is he used what he had. I always get amused when people tell me, well, I don't have much. I don't have this. Well, all Shamgar had was an ox goad. What do you got? He had an ox goad. That's all he had. Oh, by the way, do you remember the Rocky Balboa movies? I was watching one the other day, and I remember that when he went, in the very first movie, when he went against Apollo Creed had all these things to work out against. He had a great place to work out. He had the news agencies would come in and take pictures of him while they worked out. But all Rocky had was an old side of beef. And he hit it, and he hit it. He started where he was at. See, the point of it is, don't start when you finally have what you think you should have. Start where you're at. You don't have to wait for something to do something. Oh, some of you know who Paul Crouch is. Paul Crouch of TBN Trinity Broadcasting Company. When he started, all he had was $500. But you know what he did with that $500? He went down to the bank and he opened up an account for Trinity Broadcasting Network. And you couldn't even begin to buy that company for less than $25 billion today. See, what he did is he started where he was at. He started with $500, and he said, I'm going to start where I am, and I'm going to use what I have, because that's all I got. That's all I have. If you don't know it, all that money is, all of that $500 is an ox goad. You say, well, I don't have much. That's what God can use, though. He doesn't need much to be able to open the Red Sea to get you to the other side. He doesn't need that. All he needed was just a little rock to hit the head of a giant. He didn't need much. That's all he had. See, if you don't understand what I'm saying, all you need is just a little bit. And if you're a Christian today, God has given you an ox goad in your life somehow, something that will get you into the impossible, something that will help you get beyond where you are today. Now remember, all he is a farmer with an ox goad, but one day it occurs to him, this ox goad, it's an awful lot like a spear. I wonder if I can use that. And he began to imagine what it would be like if he used that ox goad as more than just a prodder, as more than just a shovel, as more than just a farm tool. And it dawns on him that God has put something else in his hand that can be used for something more. And so he said, this thing affords me more opportunity than I've been given it credit for. And I've been limiting it to what it can be used for. And church, that's a leadership lesson right there. Because one of the reasons that a lot of people don't see a future, one of the reasons that our kids don't see a future is because they don't know what they have. Nobody's taken the time to be able to express or speak into their life and tell them, this is what I see in you. This is what I know you could do. Oh my goodness, look at the success. It's all around you. Nobody's told them that. But by the way, nobody told their parents either. And nobody told their grandparents that either. So you have generational failure because nobody told them what they could do with what they had. Now look at what this man has. All he has is an ox goad. But he's a resource farmer. Here's a guy that says, I don't have much, but watch what I can do with what I got. It's when he realized that he had a lethal weapon that you see God beginning to use him in a way he never believed that he could have before. Now, when you survey the Bible, you see person after person after person that didn't have much. And you should never, saints, if I could just say this to you, you should never be... how can I say it? You should never be defined by the mountain that you see in front of you. Should never be defined like that. In fact, you need to define the giant by the way you conquer it. Isn't that right? Define it. Don't let it define you. See, all Moses had was a crook with a little turn on the end of it. That's all the man had. But all the guy knew how to do is to shepherd sheep. But when he took it out to the Red Sea, he was able to part it right down the middle. He didn't look at what he'd been doing for the last 40 years. He looked at what he was going to do for the next 40 years. And God said to Moses, he said, hey, what's that in your hand? And he said, well, I don't know. It's a stick. And he said, well, throw it down. He threw it down. It became a snake. And he said, no, pick it up again. And he picked it up and it became a stick again. And he said, now hold it over the Red Sea and watch what God did. He parted the Red Sea, and all of a sudden it became a powerful weapon in the hand of a man that was willing to trust in God. God told David, he said, David, what's that in your hand? He said, well, it's a little slingshot. He said, well, what's that in your other hand? Oh, it's a rock. Okay, what can you do to trust me with that? Well, I got this old giant over here, and he's been teasing all the people of Israel. He's been telling them that he's going to conquer them. And he said, well, that's good enough. What can you do with it, David? So David said, I can run through a troop and leap over a wall. I believe that I can handle this situation right here. David goes up and doesn't let the giant define who he is or who his nation is. He defines who that giant is. And he calls him for what he is. Dead. Gone. Vamoose, vio con Dios. And see, there was another boy. There was a little boy in the New Testament who all he had was a few crackers and a few sardines. But out of that, he was able to feed 5,000 men, not counting the women, not counting the children. So you have probably 20-some-odd thousand people. And it should always amaze you what God could do with what's in your hand when you trust God, if you use it for God. So all Shamgar had was an ox goad. That's all that God needed. He didn't need more than that. But how much more could you do if you would only trust in the true God? If you only knew what God put in your hand. You say, well, I don't see much. That's okay. All that he needs is you to open your hand to him. Don't open your hand to the enemy. Don't go like this. Say, God, I don't have much, but everything I have, I want to give to you. So that's the second thing I see. But the third thing that I see is this. Remember, he started where he was at. He didn't wait till he could get off the farm to make a difference because he's a farmer. And the only thing he knew to use was an ox goad, so he used what he had. But finally, the third thing is this. He did what he could with what he had. All right, so we're told in this verse now that he killed 600 Philistines. And here's a valid question. How do you take on 600 Philistines? Well, I guess we heard that Samson took on 1,000 with the jawbone of a donkey, so we know it's possible. But when 600 anybody's are coming against you, we're talking about terrorists here. We're talking about people who want to kill you, who want to destroy you, and all you got is a stick with a point on it? Are you serious, God? How do you defeat 600 anybody's that are coming to you with ill in their mind, and they want to destroy you? Now, but according to this verse, he took 600 people out, and according to this verse, he had 600 to 1 odds. But how do you defeat somebody when you have 600 to 1 odds against you? But the Bible tells us that with God, all things are possible. Now watch this, because in chapter 5, verse 6, it tells us that the roads were abandoned and people went around about ways to get wherever they needed to go. In other words, people, what he did is he picked them off along the way. When all the graves were counted, he'd picked up 600 different Philistines, 600 different problems, 600 major issues that had hit his life, 600 major prayer requests that he'd taken to the altar to pray about, 600 of them, 600 impossibilities. Now listen to me, church, you are not going to achieve your dreams overnight. Anybody who ever told you would was lying to you, and I apologize for that. Nobody should have ever told you that you can achieve something overnight. But let me tell you what you can do. When you got 600 to 1 odds against you, take them on one at a time. Take them on a little bit here and a little bit there. And it won't happen overnight, because and I know that there are some exceptions to that, but for the most part, they don't happen overnight. So take them as they come. And your possibilities, your prospects of possibility are going to come true because you dared to take on a few impossibilities over here, a few more over there, but you took them one at a time, and at the end of your life, it looked just like Shamgar's life. I got 600 impossibilities, 600 things that came against me in my life, and guess what? God got me through, and his name is written in the Bible because of it. Now here's what I want you to see about Shamgar. Shamgar is not about to let 600 crazy people define his destiny, and you ought not to let crazy people define your destiny. You ought not to let that happen. You see, everybody else is telling you what you ought to be doing, but what has God told you to do? In this new year, what has God told you that you are to do? Wouldn't it be helpful if you knew? Sometimes you don't. But what you've been doing is maybe listening to 600 different voices telling you, oh, you ought to go there. Oh, you ought to go here. You ought to let this happen. And what will happen so many times is you find yourself listening to 600 confusing directions. So what he did, he took off one at a time. He picked one off here, and he picked off one of there. You see, that's how you do things. And by the way, if you were to sit down and write a book, do you know how to write a book? You write it one page at a time. How do you lose weight? You don't lose it 10 pounds at a time. You lose it 1 pound at a time. And most of us have been trying to build up our pocketbook by waiting until grandma dies. But what if you just saved 1 penny at a time? What if you put $1 in here, $10 over there, $100 over here? You see, many of us have been saying, I hope somebody dies so they can help me pay my bills. No, that's not the way that you do it. You save a little here, and you save a little over there. You see, the way that life is put together is it is a little bit here, and it is a little bit there. And when you look at it at the end of your life, and you see the testimonies that God has amassed, either in your life or in the life of our church, you see that the secret is that you just kept on showing up, and you kept on showing up, and you kept on believing that God could handle the problem of today to get you to tomorrow. Now, I told you that there was 3 points that I was going to bring you, and then I told you that Shamgar had an amazing secret. So let me share with you what it is. You see, Shamgar had an astounding secret, and it is the key to his building the impossibilities in his life and turning them into possibilities. To build the prospect of possibility in his life, this is what he leaned on. See, it's the key to beating the year. It's the key to going through this year successfully. It's the key because it's all in his name. It's in his name. You see, the name Shamgar means the one who listens to God. That's the key to his success. And I believe, people, that it can be the key to your success in this year, 2019. You've been facing so much in years past, but have you ever leaned on your name? And Shamgar's name was the one who listens to God. So many people are calling your name. So many people are trying to advertise to you on TV or in a newspaper or on the highway when you're driving by. They're trying to give you their product, and they want you to spend money to be able to peddle their merchandise, and sometimes they'll give it to you for free. And they tell you, you're just the person we've been looking for. But the fact of it is, what they're looking for is to make money. And if you haven't figured it out, the one who sells you their product is the one who they've decided you're the one that can profit them the most. And so they'll gladly give you samples, and they'll gladly give you thousands of dollars if they know that they can make tens of thousands of dollars on you. But what you need to see is that the reason that Shamgar was successful is because Shamgar was only listening to one voice. He wasn't listening to all the voices over TV or radio or in the movie theaters or wherever. He was only listening to one voice. And Shamgar's attitude was, God, what do you want me to do? What would you have me to do, God? And because as long as I hear from you, I know that I can't fail. As long as I hear from you, I can start where I can use what I can, and I can do whatever I can, and you will be there behind me. Because, God, I can run through a troop and I can leap over a wall if you're with me. So I'm going to trust you, Lord. And I trust that you will enable me to live in the realm of possibilities, not impossibilities. And you can give me the prospects of possibility in an impossible world. And so with that, Lord, I know that I can beat the odds. That's what Shamgar was saying. And that's what he was looking at. Some people will tell you what you can't do just by looking at you. Other people will tell you what you should never do just by looking at you. And they'll tell you what you can't ever achieve, what God has put in your heart. And they're going to tell you you can't do it. But God, the creator of heaven and earth, is the one who spoke into your heart. He's the one who told you what you can do. And some people can tell you that you're not good enough. They'll tell you you're not fast enough. And they'll tell you you're not smart enough. And what they'll tell you is what you're not. And they'll tell you that you can't do this because it's just not possible. But here's the question. If God has said it, how can I not do it? If God has told me that I can, no matter what you say can ever measure against what God told me I could do. So therefore, if I listen to you, I'm not going to get anywhere. But if I listen to God, I can run through a troop. I can leap over a wall. I can do the impossible. See, you don't have to limit yourself by what other people have been saying to you. You don't have to limit yourself in the way that others have been trying to define you. You had an alcoholic father. Well, should that define you? No, it shouldn't. I know your mother told you you're never going to measure up, but that doesn't have to name you. That's not your name. That's not what God has called you. See, you, brothers and sisters, aren't called by anybody but God to live up to expectations. Don't worry about what the world says. You don't ever have to live up to their expectations. Live up to God's. Live up to what He says for you. See, Shamgar only listened to God. And if they didn't say what God said, he wasn't going to listen, because God told him that he could do more with an ox goad than he thought or anybody else thought that he could do. So what he did is he listened to God. Everybody's different. Everybody has different potential. I know that. Everybody has a different future in this year, 2019. But you should know that God has equipped you. You should know that God has given you a special kind of an ox goad to be able to go through this world with. He's equipped you. You have one. And by the way, don't wait till you leave the farm to use it. Start using it today. Learn to use what God has put in your hands where you are right now. Some of you are going to be singing in the church here. Some of you will be using your musical instruments up here in front of the church. Some of you will be preaching the gospel. I have no doubt about that. Some of you will be leading hundreds maybe of people to the Lord because you used what you had. You said, I don't have the words to do it. Doesn't matter. God will give you the words. I don't know how to wordsmith the way that you do, Pastor. That's okay. God knows how to do it. You see, in that day, He will tell you what to say. So start where you're at. Use what you can. Let me explain it this way. You've got to accept this, that you can do what God has put in your heart to do. You can achieve what God has told you will do, because only God can come through for you. And by the way, isn't that where you want to be? In an impossible situation where only God could bring you through. So this is how your Heavenly Father acts. This is how your Heavenly Father wants to take you by your hands in this new year. So here's what I want to say to you. Beat the odds this year. Doesn't matter what's against you. Build the prospects of possibility in your life this year. Don't let the 600 dictate what you're going to do and where you're going to go, especially when you know the only one that matters. Amen? So my prayers for you this year is that you would have a happy new year. My prayer for you is that this would be the greatest year of our lives. When I look at this year and when I look at what you and I are going to be able to see God do in and through us, it excites me. It wakes me up in the middle of the night and I don't know what to do about it. God, are you really going to do these things? But my prayer for you is that you will see this new year like I've seen it. See, this is what I know about Him. Greater is He that's in me than he that's in the world. So therefore, with great confidence, I can face tomorrow. Therefore, with great confidence, I can wake up in the morning. Therefore, with great confidence, I can know that my God is greater than any odds that are against me. And if the greater one is inside of you, everything that's outside of that, that's trying to define you, will need to shut down, because only the greater one can tell you what your future holds. Let's bow our heads in prayer.